You're now watching Q News. Here are the top stories for this hour. In Gaza City, panic and devastation followed an Israeli airstrike as Palestinians were seen fleeing the targeted areas in fear for their lives. The strike, which took place in a densely populated neighborhood, resulted in multiple injuries, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Footage from the aftermath showed civilians, including women and children, scrambling through the rubble and smoke as ambulances and rescue teams rushed to the scene. Local health authorities reported that several of the injured were in critical condition and had been transferred to overstressed hospitals already struggling with limited medical supplies and power outages. Footage from central Gaza showed rescuers transporting bodies after an Israeli airstrike struck the Beit refugee camp. According to the Palestine Red Crescent, the bodies were recovered following the strike, which devastated several homes in the densely populated camp. The video was geolocated to areas near Nusayrat and Deir al-Balah using street layouts and nearby hospital facades. Palestinian medical workers reported that at least 45 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes across Gaza on Thursday alone, including 23 in the Beit attack. The Israeli occupation military aggression has continued to target multiple areas of the enclave, escalating the humanitarian toll and leaving thousands of civilians at further risk. French President Emmanuel Macron has described the situation in Gaza as not acceptable, calling on Europe to toughen its collective stance. Speaking at a press conference in Singapore alongside Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, Macron said he remained hopeful the Israeli government would change course and deliver a true humanitarian response. He also reaffirmed that establishing a Palestinian state was not only a moral duty but a political necessity to achieve lasting regional stability. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said his government accepts the U.S. proposal for a Gaza ceasefire and detainees release. The White House confirmed Israel has signed off on a 60-day ceasefire plan while military operations continue in Gaza. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Israel approved the proposal before it was sent to Hamas. Hamas acknowledged receipt of the proposal and said its leadership is reviewing Israel's response amid what it described as ongoing suffering in Gaza. Israeli protesters gathered near the Karm Abu Salim border crossing today in an attempt to block humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. Demonstrators were seen standing in front of 8 trucks, trying to prevent them from passing through. The protest comes amid continued tensions over aid delivery during Israel's ongoing military campaign in the Strip. Yemen's Houthi movement has announced that they fired a missile targeting Israel's Ben Gurion Airport. The group's military spokesperson Yahya Saria claimed the attack forced Israelis to seek shelter and disrupted air traffic control at the airport. Israel's military responded, saying the missile launched from Yemen was intercepted, according to a statement on the messaging app Telegram. This attack follows an Israeli strike on Wednesday targeting Houthi positions, including the group's last operational plane at Sana'a International Airport, after the Houthis had launched missile attacks towards Israel the previous day. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move to a live broadcast of a United Nations Security Council session on threats to international peace and security.
To be addressed once and for all. In 2014, owing to an anti-constitutional coup d'etat supported and sponsored by the US and the EU, a new regime came to power in Ukraine, and it tried to stamp out all that is Russian. Over all these years, it has violated the rights of people living in the east and the south of Ukraine and in other regions as well. We cannot and will not sit idly by and look on as millions of Russian-speaking people continue to live under a regime where it's pursuing a policy which flagrantly violates their main rights and freedoms. If the the authorities in Kiev, neo-Nazi authorities, think that they can achieve an end to the military hostilities and at the same time maintain the system of repression and discrimination vis-a-vis a significant portion of its own population in Ukraine, well then they're deeply mistaken. Maintaining the status quo means knowingly ignoring norms of international law and the UN Charter. Article 1 of the Charter clearly states that we must respect human rights irrespective of their language, race, sex, or religion. Today, in Ukraine, we see the exact opposite. In practice, the Russian-speaking population is being persecuted. The canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church is seeing restrictions placed on its activities, and there are other flagrant violations of the rights of national minorities. As we call on our European colleagues who've been so actively defending democratic values to demand for Kiev to abolish discriminatory laws which are directly at odds with international law. This would be an opportunity to really put your position to the test. For now, we've heard all sorts of pronouncements about human rights, but we haven't seen a single instance of real steps being taken to protect the rights of millions of people. Their rights are being systematically violated in Ukraine as we speak. The political expediency is making our Western colleagues deaf and dumb when it comes to the rights of the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine, the Russian language, canonical orthodoxy, the glorification of Hitler's accomplices, and the dissemination of neo-Nazism in Ukraine. If you really do want lasting and sustainable peace in Ukraine, the current situation cannot continue. President, the time has come for everyone to choose. We did this back in 2022. And we won't leave Russian people to their own devices. If we need, we will continue fighting for as long as necessary, if that's necessary. No threats to our borders, no anti-Russian, neo-Nazi education in neighboring countries. We won't allow for any of that to happen. Now the ball is in the court of those who are behind the anti-Russian project in Ukraine. Did they understand the mistakes they made, how senseless it is to try and vanquish and isolate Russia? If you truly are Russophobes, then, well, we probably don't have anything to discuss with you. However, if you are ready to discuss potential options for us to coexist or perhaps even to cooperate, then we can talk. We've never rejected dialogue, nor do we reject dialogue now. The choice is yours. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. تتواصل الحرب الدائرة.
Thank you, President. The war between Russia and Ukraine is continuing. The logic of confrontation and escalation is also continuing, as well as strikes and polarization. And this continues in spite of the diplomatic efforts that have recently been successful in gathering the two parties together in the city of Istanbul in Turkey for the first time in more than 3 years. Unfortunately, the losses in terms of innocent human lives, including children, women, and older persons, these numbers are still increasing. And we're also seeing an increase in the suffering of civilians and displaced persons, and people are simply having to flee their homes and flee the conflict areas. In addition, this conflict continues to spread, and it has economic impacts not just in the region, but in the entire world, including in developing regions that have been affected seriously by energy and food crises that have resulted from this. Algeria has warned on several occasions about the flow of weapons from conflict areas, which exacerbates the ferocity of the war and moves us away from any potential peaceful solution. The escalation of tensions will only lead to further hostilities, which could themselves lead the entire region into a interminable conflict and crisis. Therefore, today we would like to reiterate the following points. First of all, the escalation is continuing and the bloody armed conflict between the two parties remains a major concern for Algeria. Algeria condemns the violations of international law, including international humanitarian law. We call on the parties once again to show restraint and to curb the escalation and to respect their international commitments, prioritizing the protection of civilians. Targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure is unacceptable in any circumstances. Under international law, this is forbidden. Secondly, we would once again like to express our deep concern about the use of lethal weapons and ammunition in the conflict areas. We call on the parties to ensure that these weapons do not fall into the hands of criminal or terrorist groups or extremist groups, which often use them in attacks against innocent civilians to impose their control. 3, we reiterate our appeal to the parties to ensure that dialogue prevails and to use diplomacy, focusing all efforts on trying to find common understanding through direct negotiations, with the goal of a ceasefire in mind and to achieve lasting peace in the region on the basis of the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, while also bearing in mind their respective security concerns as appropriate. By way of conclusion, Algeria reiterates its unwavering commitment to support any diplomatic efforts that aim to put an end to this war and to find a just, lasting solution that can satisfy both parties. We call on the international community to redouble diplomatic efforts at all levels to bring about the necessary conditions to facilitate negotiations between the two parties to bring about peace and security in the region.
I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. This council met as recently as yesterday to discuss the situation in Ukraine. In that meeting, the United States called on the Russian Federation to demonstrate a sincere interest in peace and accept the ceasefire. We have little to add to that statement. The Russian Federation called today's meeting to advance the claim that European countries, by providing assistance to Ukraine, are undermining efforts to restore peace. That is not the case. Ukraine, as a sovereign country, has the right to defend itself from aggression. Ukraine's fellow UN member states have a right to provide Ukraine with the means to do so. Moreover, every member of this council understands Ukraine is not the obstacle to a ceasefire that could lead to peace. Ukraine has repeatedly affirmed it is ready to accept an immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire. It is Russia that has rejected this call. We share the concern expressed by other members of this council that Russia could be uninterested in peace and instead bent on achieving a military victory. So today, the United States calls on those countries supporting Russia's war industrial base to work towards peace instead of fueling war. We urge China to reconsider supplying dual-use goods to Russia's war industrial base. Drones made by Chinese companies using Chinese technology are destroying Ukraine cities and Ukrainian families. China's policies are enabling the killing and prolonging the war. Russia's reliance on weapons and troops from the DPRK and its training of DPRK troops are particularly troubling, considering the many UN Security Council resolutions they violate. And the risk Pyongyang could use whatever rewards it receives from Russia to further threaten peace and security in its own region. The United States continues to stand for peace. It is not too late for both Russia and Ukraine to stop the fighting. We urge both sides to do so. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. The UN Charter emphasizes respect for the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of member states. We have all pledged to uphold the principles of the Charter, but Russia has blatantly violated this commitment with its brutal, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, for which it must be held fully accountable. Multiple resolutions of the General Assembly have demanded that Russia withdraw its forces from Ukraine, confirming that Russia is the aggressor and Ukraine the victim. Ukraine has the right, under Article 51 of the UN Charter, to defend itself in the face of Russia's illegal, unjustified, and unprovoked full-scale invasion launched over 3 years ago. It also has the right to acquire weapons to defend itself. Instead of discussing Ukraine's entirely legitimate effort to acquire arms for the defense of its territorial integrity and sovereignty, the Council should focus on the credible reports, notably from the Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Team. Such reports say that Russia has imported 4 million artillery shells and over 100 ballistic missiles from North Korea, a clear violation of the UN sanctions regime Russia itself agreed to. Or the reported 12,000 North Korean troops fighting against Ukraine in Russia's illegal war of aggression. Russia has also reportedly received huge quantities of drones from Iran, as well as related components and know-how, which are used to attack civilians across Ukraine in violation of international humanitarian law. Mr. President, these are the international arms transfers that must stop. Night after night, we see waves of drones and missiles raining down on Ukraine's cities. Thousands of Ukrainian civilians, including hundreds of children, have been indiscriminately killed in the war and many more injured. Russia continues to escalate its attacks, twice in recent days breaking its own grisly record for the number of drones launched on Ukraine's cities in a single day. And just 2 days ago, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine concluded that Russian armed forces had committed crimes against humanity of murder through a month-long pattern of drone attacks against civilians in areas of the Kherson province. Mr. President, Denmark underlines that Ukraine has accepted an immediate, comprehensive, and unconditional 30-day ceasefire. Russia, in contrast, has not. Russia could end the war today if it would only stop attacking Ukraine. We could have a ceasefire today if the Russian president wanted peace. It is now high time for Russia to stop attacking Ukraine and engage seriously in peace talks that the US is trying to broker. Russia must stop insisting on unserious conditions which would, in practice, end the existence of an independent Ukraine. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We met on the topic of Ukraine only yesterday, where we thoroughly expressed our position about the war and the need to end it. Let me therefore repeat. While Ukraine has shown firm commitment to engage in a peace process, Russia is committing the largest aerial attacks since the war began. Attacks causing a steep rise in civilian casualties. This must stop. And this is where a constructive approach starts. Ukraine wants peace, Europe wants peace. Not war, but peace. Mr. President, let me make a couple of additional points in this regard. Firstly, we do not accept any attempts at making inroads in the right of every country to defend itself. An inalienable right enshrined in Article 51 of the UN Charter. What is more, a country defending itself can also develop or procure the means to do so. Such acquisitions must happen against the backdrop of the international legal framework, which among others includes resolutions adopted by this Council. What is not allowed, on the other hand, is the procurement of weapons from a country sanctioned by this very body, as seems to be the case with reported weapons transfers from DPRK to Russia. This must stop immediately, and this is, again, where a constructive approach starts. Secondly, we need peace. Ukraine needs it. Europe needs it. my country has been advocating for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine since the beginning of the war. We have been calling for the immediate return of the transferred children and the civilian prisoners for years, and we have been pushing for a ceasefire for months. All we heard in return, however, is excuses and ultimatums. And Russia continues to respond to offers of peace with drones and ballistic missiles. We want this war to end, and we will not condone any justification to continue the bloodshed. Mr. President, sitting behind this table is not just a privilege. It first and foremost comes with a great responsibility. A responsibility to maintain international peace and security. This body has been failing Ukrainians for years. It is time to step up and act towards a peace anchored in the UN Charter and its principles. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, President. Following the Security Council's meeting held just yesterday on the situation in Ukraine, I would like to briefly highlight the following key points. First, the Republic of Korea reiterates its firm position that all hostilities must cease fully and immediately. The indiscriminate use of large-scale drone and missile attacks, including Russia's largest aerial assault of the war in recent days involving hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles, only increases civilian suffering and erodes trust. Such actions, deadly and destructive, are fundamentally incompatible with any sincere efforts towards ceasefire and peace. Second, rather than merely attributing the prolongation of the war to Western military support for Ukraine, we expect the Russian Federation to demonstrate actual political will and engage constructively in negotiations. In this regard, we note Russia's recent proposal for a new round of talks in Istanbul and express our hopes for their success. However, we are particularly concerned by recent reports of Russian force buildups near the Sumy region. We hope that Russia, instead of preparing for a summer offensive, will take genuine steps toward dialogue. Third, we reiterate our concern that ongoing military cooperation between Russia and the DPRK is what is prolonging the war. Despite the repeated condemnation of the international community, Russia and North Korea continue to engage in a series of unlawful activities that are explicitly prohibited under multiple Security Council resolutions. These include the large-scale transfer of arms and related materials, as well as the training by Russian forces of North Korean troops deployed to Russia for direct support in Russia's war against Ukraine. No matter how hard the two parties attempt to obfuscate these illicit exchanges and cooperation, the Council must not turn a blind eye to such flagrant violations. Only through persistent efforts to elucidate the illegality of their actions and call for immediate cessation can we prevent further collusion that threatens peace and security in the region and beyond. Indeed, the Council must not overlook these blatant violations. Continued efforts to expose and halt such illicit activities are essential for preventing further collusion that threatens local, regional, and global peace, as well as civilian livelihoods. In conclusion, President, it is essential that the Council remains united and resolute in supporting all efforts to bring this war to an end and forge peace. The Republic of Korea remains fully committed to working in close cooperation with the international community to help restore peace and support Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席
President, the Council just discussed Ukraine yesterday. I have illustrated China's position. I will refrain from repeating myself today. Since the outbreak of the war, China has been calling on the parties to the conflict to immediately agree to a ceasefire and cease fighting, launch negotiations and restore peace. Regrettably, however, the Ukraine crisis continues to drag on, with mounting civilian casualties. This is deeply distressing and profoundly concerning. We have repeatedly stressed that another day of war brings another day of suffering and destruction, another day of instability and insecurity. With direct negotiations now underway between Russia and Ukraine, there has been an increasing number of weapons in the battlefield with greater lethality and destructive power. This will only escalate confrontation and prolong fighting. This is not conducive to achieving a ceasefire and ending the war, and runs counter to the common expectations of the international community. We urge all parties to actively forge an atmosphere conducive to peace talks by creating conditions and providing support. We also call on the parties to the conflict to work collectively towards de-escalation and a political resolution rather than persisting with military confrontation and attacks. President, the Ukraine crisis offers us one revelation: security must be mutual and equal. China advocates and upholds a global security vision that is common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable. We believe the legitimate security concerns of all countries must be taken seriously. We support all efforts for peace and stress the importance of addressing the root causes of the crisis. We look forward to an early conclusion of a just, sustained, and binding peace agreement acceptable by all the parties concerned. China stands ready to work alongside fellow members of the Group of Friends for Peace and countries in the Global South to continue to forge consensus for peace and support peace efforts, to contribute vigorously to a political settlement of the crisis. President, just now the U.S. representative once again spread misinformation, smearing and blackening China. This is utterly unacceptable. If I remember it correctly, last time the United States on the same topic used the same narrative, blamed China at the Council. That happened in January this year during the last administration of the US. In the past 4 months, the Council has deliberated on the Ukraine issue multiple times. The United States has not mentioned such a scenario, and the United States has not showed any concern or interest. Why, 4 months later, the United States once again is beating a dead horse, blaming groundlessly China? The United States' behavior at this council once again proved that the U.S. attacks against China are not based on facts at all and are not based on any solution at all. Rather, it is based on its own political agenda. It is utter political manipulation. I wish to reiterate 2 points. First, China has never provided any lethal weapons to any party of the conflict. We have strictly controlled dual-use items. Second, China firmly opposes to groundless acquisition and political manipulation. The United States bears a major responsibility for the outbreak of the war and the continuation of the war, but of course the United States has a responsibility to work its efforts and play its part for an early ending of the conflict. We urge the United States to concentrate on the ongoing diplomatic efforts and to stop this rather boring blaming game. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to start by expressing appreciation for the exceptional leadership and professionalism that you, your PR, and your team demonstrated in steering the work of the Council during the term of Greece's presidency this month. Mr. President, Pakistan remains deeply concerned over the continuing conflict in Ukraine. Yesterday, in this very chamber, we met to discuss the devastating humanitarian and security consequences of this conflict. The use of advanced weaponry in this conflict has intensified human suffering exponentially. Mr. President, I would like to emphasize the following 3 points. First, all parties should prioritize the protection of civilians, in accordance with the international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The targeting of civilians under any pretext and its characterization as collateral damage is neither acceptable nor justified. Second, the sovereign right to self-defense is enshrined in Article 51 of the UN Charter. However, it must be exercised within the confines of international law, especially the fundamental IHL principles of distinction, proportionality, and military necessity. Third, the transfer of arms and ammunition must remain within the bounds of international legal frameworks. As a matter of principle, we remain concerned on the unregulated flow of arms into conflict zones in a manner that contributes to destabilization and imperils regional and global security. Pakistan has and continues to suffer the consequences of small arms proliferation as a result of past conflicts in our.
Live from New York, today's UN Security Council session saw sharp exchanges over the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Russia warned Ukraine is near total defeat and vowed to continue fighting. Algeria stressed the need for restraint and warned against unchecked arms flows. The U.S. called on Russia to seek peace and urged China to stop supplying military materials. Denmark and Slovenia defended Ukraine's right to self-defense, with Slovenia also pushing for the return of prisoners. South Korea condemned ongoing violations and civilian attacks. China called for an immediate ceasefire, but rejected U.S. accusations of fueling the conflict. And that wraps up today's session on threats to international peace and security. And this also concludes our top stories for this hour. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.